Hello, this is Debbie McAllister, and this is Light Up Your Worth. I am so excited and so grateful to have you here with me today. Welcome back. I have a remarkable guest to talk through, something that impacts all of our lives as women, especially as we get to a certain point in life. And I'd like to introduce you to my guest, Jacqueline Rose. Jacqueline is a leading voice in educating people about women's health, peri-menopause, and menopause. She is a menopause educator and coach, a women's hormonal health specialist, a yoga for women's health teacher, a therapeutic yoga teacher, and is trained in functional blood work analysis and functional nutrition. Through her studies and teachings, she has developed a deeper understanding, awareness, and connection to her body, how it works, and how it changes over time. She found practical ways to create balance and manage expectations despite her busy life. Her mission is to support and empower women like us here at Light Up Your Worth to get proactive and improve their own health and well-being. She's especially passionate about changing the way women understand and experience their menopause journey and reframing the menopause conversation. She also created this really summit that talks all about menopause. And you got to take a look at that on her YouTube channel, which we'll share at the end of the show. Welcome, Jacqueline. So happy to have you here.
Thank you, Debbie. I always find it overwhelming when people read my bio. I wonder who they're talking about. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited. I wanted to find myself an expert on menopause since I am 11 years post-menopause. It has been a journey. And what I've realized is, like you share in your bio, is that we're not talking about it.
Yeah.
I'm excited to jump into this with you.
Thank you. Traditionally, menopause was not discussed at all. In the last 5 years, things have changed. Critically, United Kingdom, as you can hear from my accent, I'm British, and definitely the United Kingdom has been one of the pioneers in opening up this menopause conversation. It is now spreading across the globe, America, Australia, Europe. We are now having these relatively new conversations. And that's not to say that women haven't been going through menopause for forever. It's just that we weren't really talking about it. I love this topic. I'm passionate about this topic, and I'm excited to be talking about it with you.
Oh, me too. So I'm going to jump in and start asking you some thoughtful questions about how does our modern menopause journey look, and how is that different from those stereotypes we've heard of or seen?
Yes, thank you for asking. The first thing is women have always gone through different stages in our life cycle. Puberty, we all know that if we remember being teenage girls, or if we have teenage daughters, those puberty years, they are crazy. There's a lot of door slamming, a lot of yelling, but that is the hormonal system for a female. Everything starts happening. We have our reproductive years, whether you're giving birth or not, they are still reproductive years where our reproductive cycle, the most dominant feature of a female body, is in full swing. There is a lot of predictability, expected things every month, and the body is prepared for that. Sometimes it's interrupted by pregnancy, sometimes it needs help, but those are defined by fertility years with a regular, predictable menstrual cycle. We then have next 3 stages of a female life cycle, which we have totally ignored in all of our conversations in the medical health care profession, in women's health conversations, and that is perimenopause, those years leading up to menopause, which is the next stage, and postmenopause. And that whole experience, which I call the menopause journey, the perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause, was excluded from any forms of conversations. We all had the books, What to Expect When You Were Expecting. We all had the talks with our teenage daughters about periods. We had the talks, hopefully, from our mothers about the first periods, but no one talked about perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. So there was this black hole of women's health. Now, as I said, things are changing, but modern women in 2024, our health, our socioeconomic abilities, our professional capabilities, the things we're achieving in work life, in personal life, the opportunities we have available are very different today to what they were like for our grandmothers 80 years ago, 100 years ago. That's not to say they didn't live fulfilling lives. It's just our opportunities today are very different. We are living longer, which is in dispute because there are plenty of women who lived longer. If you survived childbirth, many women lived ripe old ages, but how our old age or how our aging looks today is very different. The opportunities available. So what a postmenopausal woman is able to achieve today is very different to what a postmenopausal woman was able to achieve 80 years ago or 100 years ago. So this whole topic of perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, we need intelligent conversations around that, informed conversations around that, nuanced conversations around that. And that now is beginning to happen. And that's something that I hope we're going to dive deeper into during our conversation.
Yeah, me too, because there's so many stereotypes.
Yes.
I'd love to debunk some.
Excellent. First stereotype is that menopause is the beginning of the end. And I reference here the actress Jane Fonda. And this was one of the first times that I really reframed. It was one of the first experiences of me engaging with this topic differently. The actress Jane Fonda talks about the third act. She reframes aging in a different way. In our healthcare, in our patriarchal Western society, we view aging as a bell-shaped curve. We reach midlife, that peak, everything until then is great. We reach the peak and then it's downhill from midlife, whether that's 40 or 45 or whatever age, it's downhill from there. Disease, worthlessness, being irrelevant, not being represented, everything is just downhill until you die. But Jane Fonda reframes this narrative, and she talks about a slope, a climb, and a progression until we die. At every stage, every year, every milestone, you are learning, growing, developing until you reach the end of your life, which is the end of the life is the peak. The end of the life isn't the bottom of the bell-shaped curve. The end of life is the peak. And everything until then is just a beautiful journey of learning, growth, wisdom, experience, life. If we understand women's health, particularly perimenopause, menopause, and especially postmenopause, then we start to reframe that whole aging language. We start to reframe the relevance of women. We start to reframe this vision that menopause, that peak of everything, is then the beginning of the end, and everything beyond that is downhill living. The modern menopausal woman really is beginning to realize that menopause actually is just the beginning of the next stage of our lives. I recently heard a podcast with Arianna Huffington, founder of the Huffington Post. She set up the Huffington Post at 55, her second business in her mid-60s, and she's now on her third business at 74. That is exactly what a postmenopausal woman should look like. You don't need to be a business owner. You don't need to be a multimillionaire like Arianna Huffington, but life has phenomenal opportunities in postmenopause. The challenge is, and this maybe is the next myth we have to bust, is that perimenopause and menopause is not just about surviving the symptoms. It's not just about having that HRT patch, slap it on, and now you feel amazing. It's not just about the things that you have to do to muddle your way through symptoms and perimenopause and menopause. That journey of perimenopause and menopause is a much deeper and more profound journey of this transition, this life stage, part of that puberty, reproductive years that we talked about earlier, this bridge that we have to cross to get to postmenopause. Menopause is where all the juicy good stuff is. And perimenopause and menopause, it's not just about surviving the symptoms. Because if that's all it is, you arrive at postmenopause, and has anything changed? Is anything different? Are you like ready for the next exciting chapter of your life?
Mhm.
So I think that's a second myth that I want to bust. The first one is that menopause is not the end. And the second myth, the second stereotype is this suffering, struggling, symptomatic woman in perimenopause and menopause, where all the focus is just about how do we get through the day surviving hot flushes? How do we get through the day with brain fog? How do we get through the night with the insomnia and the night sweats? How do we get through a relationship with low libido? How do we manage these symptoms? Let's start looking at this slightly differently. That maybe there's something deeper. Why is that narrative only about pain, suffering, and struggle? So I think that's enough to start with.
Yes, and I would say too, especially on the second myth, is that I know a lot of the listeners, I know myself being on that post-menopause for so long now, a decade into it, I know many women who are in this stage of life and they're just really coming into themselves versus like their confidence is higher than ever. My generation came of age when we could have a bank account here in the States, right?
Yeah.
1974, I'm in elementary school. And I think a lot of the listeners are in this decade of feeling more empowered. They no longer care about what other people think as much. They're ready to now put themselves first,
Yeah.
have those desires within themselves
Yeah. So that's
versus
another
that
thing.
myth that we're just all hysterical, right?
Yes.
We're like these crazy women.
And I think that's another feature we're not talking about enough, but is beginning to come up, as you said, as we see this postmenopausal generation of women now in their 50s, 60s, 70s, who are showing us what it means to be a proud postmenopausal woman. In sports, art, culture, literature, entertainment, politics, and business, many leaders and strong voices are older women, not women in their 20s and their 30s. Forbes every year, every December, comes out with its top list of CEOs and this and that. Forbes has end of year list in their 2023 top CEOs, top 10 CEOs, top female CEOs. You had the head of, I think, PepsiCo or the head of Coca-Cola, like top female CEOs. 9 out of the 10 were above the age of 55 or 59. They're not women in their 30s. The CEOs of top multinational companies are women over 55. When we look in politics, female leading politicians are over the age of 50. I think there is a really important conversation to have about what is this perimenopause, menopause? What is it preparing us for?
Mhm.
You do not want to meet a postmenopausal woman in a dark alley in the middle of the night, because a postmenopausal woman, as you said, is strong, is confident, knows what she wants, is not scared to say it, and is not scared to get it.
Mhm.
And I think that we need to remember that as we're navigating perimenopause and menopause.
What's another myth that you have seen?
I think when we understand the hormonal piece of it, because it is a biological process, our hormones are fluctuating, shifting, moving. Puberty is a hormonal event. Our reproductive system is waking up. Our fertility years, hormones, whether we like it or not, as females, we are hormonal beings. Our hormones run our body. Because we have a reproductive system, because we have the potential for creating life, our reproductive system and our reproductive hormones are really critical to us. And then we get into this perimenopause, menopause phase where our hormones do more interesting things, which is one of the reasons for many of the symptoms, this hormonal crazy fluctuation. And I think really understanding what's going on with our hormones, really understanding how these reproductive hormones, estrogen, progesterone, FSH, LH, and testosterone, these 5 critical reproductive hormones, what is actually happening with them, what is actually going on with them, and that they are absolutely a primary reason for symptoms, but it's also the way they interact with other elements of our body, and that our body is intrinsically changing as we navigate perimenopause and menopause. And it's much larger than just our periods stopping. Yes, it is hormonal, but it's a bigger story. When we understand what's going on with our hormones and we really understand the reproductive hormone piece, but the way our reproductive hormones are impacting so many other elements of our body. Our body is biologically changing. Our brain is biologically rewiring. There are really profound things happening in our body. And many people have used the analogy that perimenopause and menopause is the bookend to puberty. Again, when we think back to those pubescent teenage girls and what they're going through and the irrationality of a teenage girl, a hormonal teenage girl, we are really going through that as a hormonal perimenopausal woman. The body is waking up the hormonal system, and on the other end, the body is shutting down that reproductive hormonal system. So I think really getting to the depths and the deep understanding that this is a reproductive event, it is a reproductive hormone event, but it is much larger and much broader.
What if we talk about what the basics are? What is happening in the difference of those three phases, the perimenopause, menopause, and then post-menopause? Because I am not sure if people actually completely understand what the three phases are.
Thank you for asking and for allowing me to share. This word perimenopause is a relatively new word. And a lot of women get very confused between that phrase perimenopause and menopause. And okay, so let's start with menopause because that's the easiest to define. You enter official menopause when you have 12 period-free months. So 12 and so women should be tracking and marking, especially as we're getting closer to that menopause calendar deadline. 12 period-free months women should be tracking. On average, the average age is about 51. In different countries, it varies. In some countries, it's 50, 52, 49. I have clients going through menopause at 45. I have clients at 56 still having a regular cycle. So average age, 51. 12 period-free months because of hormonal fluctuation. So that reproductive system is beginning to stop functioning. The ovaries are beginning to stop functioning. They're stopping to release estrogen. The relationship between the ovaries and the brain and talking to the brain and what hormones should be released to have this monthly cycle, all of that is beginning to shut down because biologically, evolutionary-wise, from the age of 50, that's not our job anymore. Our job is not to produce babies anymore. So our system shuts down. Before those 12 months is called perimenopause. Perimenopause, we now know, can last anywhere between 2 and 10 years on average. So that means if we're talking, again, all averages, every woman is unique, every experience different. If you're 51, 12 period-free months, mark on the calendar, pop the champagne, yay, I'm in menopause. Anything 10 years before that, any symptoms, changes, nuances, experiences, physical, emotional, cognitive. So many women come to me saying, I think I've got early onset dementia. They're 45, brain fog, can't focus, can't concentrate, don't feel as sharp as they used to be, can't juggle all the things. That is classic perimenopause. And they go to their doctor. Unfortunately, so many doctors are not menopause informed. They are not menopause educated. They don't really understand perimenopause. They don't understand how the symptoms show up in these early years. And of course, perimenopause can be divided between early, mid, and late, but anywhere between those 2 and 10 years, anything going on in your 40s potentially could be related to perimenopause. Then you have menopause. And in theory, the day after you've popped that champagne, 12 period-free months, you're in postmenopause. Biologically, we give it a year, but effectively, you're in postmenopause. And then the question is, how long do you think you're in postmenopause for? The answer is, live a long, full, healthy life until the day you die. That is the life stage post-menopause. It's not just a couple of years. Post-menopause is a significant life stage. It could be 40 years that you live in post-menopause. If you're, again, average woman, go into menopause at the age of 51, live to at least 80, 85. Women are living long, healthy lives, will be 85 and beyond. That's 40 plus years you are in post-menopause. That's not just a couple of years. So the question, when I ask my clients, it's not just about how you navigate perimenopause and menopause. The big question is, how do you want your post-menopause years to look? It starts by understanding what's going on with your hormones, understanding what is triggering and exacerbating hormonal imbalance. Not only getting your symptoms really in check so that you feel amazing in midlife, but setting yourself up with health and wellness and longevity strategies so that you can navigate the most amazing post-menopause and be that woman that people are scared of in a dark alley in the middle of the night.
Say I'm a perimenopause phase of my life and I'm having some of these symptoms. What tests then, when I go to my doctor, because they don't seem to be as informed, right? They're not specializing in it. What tests are you going to recommend? And is it blood tests, spit? I remember doing spit tests or stools tests. What are they and what method would you recommend for them to go?
This is a bit of a controversial topic, but I'm always happy to talk controversy and to,
me too.
Go there. That's totally fine. I will tell you that the typical conventional medicine approach is that in perimenopause, because hormones are fluctuating, blood tests are very unhelpful because one day they could be high, one day they're all over the place. They don't give us a good understanding. If a woman goes to her doctor saying, I think I'm in perimenopause, can I get some blood work? The typical response is blood work is not very helpful. It's not going to be very informative. So on the one hand, that is correct. Yes, our hormones are fluctuating. And yes, on any given day, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone could be high, could be low. However, I do believe that symptomology, so really understanding the symptoms together with a deep analysis and understanding of blood work from a functional perspective, working together, these two elements together, and having a wide enough range of blood markers so that we get a really good picture of what's going on in the body, can be very informative. One disclaimer is blood work shows what is going on in the body at the moment the blood was taken. There are some markers like HA1C, which shows 3-month blood glucose level. There are also iron markers show 3-month iron storage, but in general, blood is only showing you what is happening at the time that the blood is drawn. It can be helpful and informative, especially when you are using it together with good symptomology and a good health history and really understanding what the woman is going through. But I also believe that as a good health practice is we should be tracking our blood work on a regular basis. So a one-time blood test may not reveal very much, but 3 blood tests over the course of a year, or blood tests annually, or 2 blood tests over the course of a number of years, we're going to start seeing patterns. That's what I'm interested in. I'm not really interested in the objective number. I'm interested in the blood patterns. I had a client who one of her issues was weight loss. And all her blood markers were pretty much okay, but consistently over time, her TSH level, which is the only thyroid marker everyone tests, unless you're really demanding a full thyroid panel, consistently her TSH level had always been low. And I said, this is not a one-time thing. Your TSH level, which is the first thyroid marker that everyone looks at to justify doing a full thyroid panel, it's always been low. Why has no one ever mentioned that? It's always been within range, but conventional medicine ranges are very wide, not specific enough to females on perimenopause and menopause. She said, do you think I could have had a thyroid problem without anyone really bringing it up? I said, absolutely. Without proper testing of your full thyroid panel, it's difficult to know. Over the course of 5 years, this marker has been consistently low. And no one has run a full thyroid panel. I'm not saying she has a thyroid problem. I'm looking at patterns, relationships between numbers, symptoms, and how you feel. This starts to bring together a puzzle of what is actually going on with the woman. And obviously, we want to be looking at things like vitamin D levels and magnesium levels and cholesterol levels and all these different things. We don't just want to be looking at the reproductive hormones. That is one piece of this very big puzzle. But so that's my answer to this blood work question. It's a nuanced, and I know it's very much against what a lot of women will hear from their doctors.
Yeah, and I really like you're actually looking at the trends that are happening. And you do mention the TSH because it's something I've had run. And it is low in those, the range is really big.
Yes.
And it's men and women in there and all ages.
Yeah.
What ranges are you really looking at when you say that's low, and maybe it might be something to go investigate on? What
Yeah.
ranges would you suggest?
Conventional medicine ranges, most people get their blood work done. You may get the report and you'll see your number, and then you'll see how your number falls in line with the range. And it can be high, middle, low. Normally, you won't get a call from a doctor unless that marker is way out of range. And the minute it's out of range, you already are in disease mode. And that's when the doctor gets very excited. They can treat you, prescribe medication, and actually do something for you. But what is happening for all those years when it's within range, but very high or low, but you're still within range? That is the time when you can really start being proactive in taking care of your health so that you don't get into the disease state. So when we look at functional blood work ranges, we're looking at much smaller ranges that are much more sensitive. And doctors don't really, unless you're in the functional medicine space, conventional medicine doctors don't really like these ranges. And I will say to my clients, your blood looks like it's getting really close to the edge. And they'll go to the doctor, and the doctor will say, you're in range. But she's also symptomatic. So I hear from so many of my clients, my doctor said my blood work looks normal, but I don't feel normal. These women are symptomatic, but the blood work is supposedly normal. So functional blood work and functional medicine is looking at two things. The first one is much more sensitive ranges so that we can really start supporting you before you get to the disease state. We want you to be healthy and well. So those ranges are much more sensitive. As you've said, the ranges in conventional medicine are very broad. They take men and women. They are very wide ranges because of how they're calculated and relationships between things. I'm not only interested in objective numbers. I'm looking at relationships between numbers in different groups. So I want to look at all your cholesterol numbers together. I want to look at your blood count numbers and see the relationships between some of them. I also want to see, for example, even if we are talking about perimenopause and menopause, your estrogen and progesterone is not just the objective numbers, it's the relationship between those two numbers. Your estrogen level may be objectively totally fine, but if your estrogen to progesterone level is out of ratio, is out of range, then you're estrogen dominant with a normal estrogen number. So you may be having estrogen dominant symptoms, but your estrogen blood work is within range. Everything looks fine. But when we look at it in the relationship between progesterone, you could easily be estrogen dominant if your progesterone is in the tank. So that is why I actually do think blood work is important. And I see a lot from a different perspective.
Yeah, that's really important. I believe that all women should have both type of providers, that you should have a functional, which I do, who took lab work and pointed out big things for me to look at, as well as my PC, my primary care. Like, she just ran blood work. Even though I share records, I track it in my own Excel spreadsheet because I, like you, want to make sure of the trends.
Yeah.
So that I can ask the questions.
100%. And as you said, there are some in functional medicine, there are other tests you can do, saliva tests, urine tests. There are certain things like cortisol, which is the stress hormone, plays a big role in our perimenopause and menopause experience. And that you can test it on a blood test, but really you want to test it on a saliva test. That's a much better, more accurate test to do. If you're going to your PCP, to your local doctor, they are going to do just the regular standard blood work. If you really want a more in-depth, you can either go to a functional medicine doctor or go to work with a lab that does a slightly larger variety of tests. We don't just learn about our body from our blood. There are lots of ways that we can learn about what's going on in our body.
I just recently heard about this cortisol test that you
Yes.
can do and how that is impacting all of those 5 hormones.
Yeah. So we can go down the cortisol route, and it's a fascinating topic. I love talking about it. Cortisol is a stress hormone released by the adrenal glands. We need cortisol in our 24-hour cycle to live. It is an essential hormone for healthy living. The problem is in our modern 2024 lifestyle, in our modern lifestyle, we have super high levels of cortisol, and they are usually high pretty much the whole time. We are stimulated, we are activated, our phone pings, we're listening to the news, we get calls from school, our boss is breathing down our neck with a deadline, financial stresses, relationship stresses. We are living in a stressed out state, which means that cortisol, which has a very important role in a natural biological way, starts having very detrimental effects on our biology, on our health and well-being when it is activated 24/7 or 23/7 or whatever it is, when it's, and that is a trigger for what functional medicine doctors and regular doctors are talking about now: inflammation, insulin resistance. It is absolutely a trigger for gut health and digestive changes, and it impacts as estrogen, progesterone, testosterone is now all fluctuating and is now all doing this roller coaster because we're in perimenopause and menopause. Cortisol is impacted by those fluctuations and impacts the extent and can exacerbate those fluctuations. So it starts being a real soup mix of hormonal chaos where cortisol is one of the leading players. A lot of symptoms in perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, and also, dare I say it, during our reproductive years, is very much cortisol triggered.
Oh. As we have talked through these different phases of our lives and the impact of how hormones are impacting us, I know sometimes I hear friends who ask if I'm on any type of hormone replacement therapy or HRT. And now, when I was young, I remember hearing, oh, don't take it. And now there seems to be a different opinion out there, or perhaps the hormones are different than what HRT is now. So I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we can do a whole podcast on HRT. So I'm going to try and keep it brief, but I'm going to try and explain our current understanding of HRT. So I apologize if I ramble a little bit. I'm going to try and keep it as succinct as possible. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, HRT, hormone replacement therapy, and I call it hormone replacement therapy generation 1.0, was standard practice for giving to menopausal women as treatment for mostly hot flushes, vaginal dryness, some other menopausal symptoms, but it was standard practice of care. There was no controversy around it. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that is what women received, usually in the form of a pill, HRT generation 1.0. And it was fine. Women sailed through their menopause, and we knew that they had bone protection because of their estrogen that they were receiving, and everything was fine. In 2002, the Women's Health Initiative study results came out prematurely because they discovered that there was, according to this big research project that was going on, a relationship, an increased relationship between HRT use and female cancer risks, uterine cancer, endometrial cancer, breast cancer. And because of this relationship, the research trial was stopped abruptly. HRT literally overnight was stopped as a treatment for menopause. In my Menopause Summit, which you mentioned in my introduction, I have run the Menopause Summit annually for 3 years, and I've spoken to doctors who remember in 2002, for 10, 15, 20 years, being able to prescribe HRT, hormone replacement therapy, and from one day to the next, they were unable to prescribe it. Women didn't want it. Women were scared. Medical guidelines came out. You can't prescribe HRT. It causes an increased risk of cancer. Doctors stopped providing it, and women were left hanging high and dry with their symptoms with no forms of treatment. In the intervening 15 years it took that research to be debunked. There were fantastic podcast episodes. Peter Attia did an excellent review with a menopause specialist about what was wrong with that research trial. So they were using old forms of HRT, which were very synthetic. Secondly, the drug trials were on women 60 plus, not perimenopause or menopause. Thirdly, the problem with the progesterone, the different research groups within the research trials, and some were only on estrogen, some were on estrogen and progesterone, and it was the progesterone seemed problematic, not the estrogen piece. Anyway, not to go too deep into a rabbit hole of what was wrong with the research and this sort of very media hyping, what we would call today clickbaiting headlines that came out about HRT causes cancer or has an increased cancer risk. What is the state of play today in 2024? Firstly, we have different types of HRT. We have bioidentical HRT and not synthetic HRT. And even the HRT that is being used, there are different types of it. We not only have generation 2.0 HRT, we have generation 3.0 HRT. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there is much more of understanding of the benefits of hormones, specifically estrogen and testosterone, even progesterone, but the long-term health benefits for women to have these hormones, what it means, what it does in our bodies, the longevity, the health and wellness implications, not only to help manage and treat symptoms, longevity. Many doctors understand the pros and cons. Pill form of hormones is still the worst kind to take. If you want to be taking any types of hormones, you want to be taking it transdermally, gel, patch, cream. I'm not anti or pro HRT. The name actually has changed. Rather than hormone replacement therapy, we now call it menopausal therapy or hormonal therapy rather than that replacement. The replacement word caused a lot of problems also because women are like, am I replacing the levels to my fertility years? I don't want to be having periods. So what is replacing it to what levels? Menopausal hormonal therapy or menopausal or hormonal therapy. But my personal opinion is I'm not pro, I'm not anti. There is room to have a conversation with your healthcare provider, whether it is relevant for you or not. There are two disclaimers to this, however. The first, what are your other health factors? Do you drink, smoke? Are you overweight? Do you have a prior history of cancer in your family? One of the three main ones. Those may be high-risk cancer factors, whether you take HRT or not. There are comorbidity factors for cancer that have nothing to do with taking HRT or not. So if you're going to take HRT and then all of a sudden, God forbid, you get diagnosed with cancer, did you have comorbidity factors before HRT? That's the first thing. The second thing, and this is much more important, is what else is going on in your life? What else is happening with your hormones? Do you have external triggers, lifestyle factors exacerbating hormonal fluctuations? Stress, nutrition, sleep, exercise, self-care, and connection. What is going on in those 5 areas of your life that may be exacerbating your symptoms, may actually be triggering your symptoms if you're eating a high sugar, high carb, high processed diet? It doesn't matter how much HRT you're going to be taking. You may still be feeling absolutely exhausted, be totally bloated, have digestive problems, and may feeling low energy just because of what you eat. You could make small changes to your diet, adding more protein, adding more healthy fats, eating more fiber, that actually would have a major impact on your symptoms before you even go near an estrogen patch. Estrogen may or may not have a role for you, and some women need some form of HRT to get them to a space where they can think about all the other things in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Some women, a lot of the women that I work with, do all their stuff. They assess their stress level. They really look at what they're eating. They're moving in the right way that's appropriate for midlife. They are sleeping as best as they can. Very few of us are sleeping ideally. And they're really looking after their self-care, and they're doing all the things to really nurture and nourish themselves. And for some women, that is gold. They feel amazing. They're taking the supplements they need to be taking. They're doing all the things. And some women, even though they're doing everything, their hormones are still not getting up to the level where they can really feel great. And in those situations, maybe then HRT is going to be necessary. But if you're not looking at everything else, if you're not looking at what else is going on in your life, just sticking estrogen patch on you, it's like pouring water into a bucket with a hole. You may feel great for a bit, but it's not going to heal you long term, because the triggers for hormonal imbalance are still there. You're not dealing with the root cause of what is really going on here.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things you
That's
mentioned
my
too,
short answer.
yeah. So one of the things you mentioned too was a sense of community
Yes.
with stress.
Yeah.
You don't generally
Yeah.
hear that, even though my friends and the people I talk to and network with, it just seems so much more important now
Yeah.
than it did even when I was in the childbearing years and child raising
Yeah.
years. It's always been important, but it feels almost like a lifeline now.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting piece, and there's a biological and a spiritual, psychological element to it. Let's talk about the biological piece of this conversation around connection and community. We've been talking a lot about reproductive hormones, cortisol. We haven't touched on insulin, but insulin, thyroid hormones, all these different hormones are really important. They're playing a really big role. However, there are other hormones, feel-good hormones, brain hormones, that are really important here. When they are depleted, it exacerbates our menopause symptoms. And one of those hormones is oxytocin. Now, we always talk about oxytocin in context of the love hormone, either in love relationships, intimate relationships, or when you give birth, that bond between a mother and her baby, the birthing process releases all this oxytocin, the movement of skin to skin and zero separation between a mother and her newborn baby. Oxytocin, it's so important. It's really good for bonding, for love. Oxytocin actually plays a really important role in our brain to help us feel good, and is the connection hormone. As we navigate this perimenopause, menopause time, and we're going through all these emotional, cognitive changes, one of the things that women find they experience is that they become much more selfish in their needs. I don't want to be in a room full of 150 people at a party. I want to go out with 3 trusted friends for coffee. I don't want to go out and be that center of attention if you're a very extrovert person, or I don't want to be in like that big space of lots of people. I just want to be with a few close friends. That is part of this deeper menopause journey, being selective about who you want to be with. A lot of women find that they energetically don't want to be with certain people anymore. They're focused on choosing who they spend time with. Female connection becomes really important because of oxytocin. We can trigger oxytocin through deep female connection. So even if it's going out for a coffee with a friend, or going for a walk with a friend, or talking to a trusted girlfriend, any of that type of stuff boosts your oxytocin levels, which can have a profound impact on our brain function, a profound impact on how we're feeling. So It's biological and psychological happening around perimenopause and menopause, and really sets it in postmenopause.
That is so fascinating to learn that, because
Yeah,
I've been witnessing it, and to
yeah,
know that there's the chemicals in our body, the
yeah.
oxytocin is part of that. What can women do to manage symptoms? So we're leaving you here. What can women do to manage symptoms with my interview with Jacqueline Rose? We've broke up this episode into 2 parts, so I hope you will continue as we talk through the second part of this conversation. And we start talking more about managing menopause symptoms, hormone replacement therapy or HRT insights, lifestyle and supplemental tips, individual experiences and challenges, the importance of nutrition and movement, self-care and life changes, and understanding and managing symptoms. So we're going to dive further into this on part 2. So I hope you will join us then. Thanks for being here.